Hello, it's Scott Manley here. If during this video you hear sounds of drilling, hammering, or sawing, it's because we have people at the house. I need to record videos, so I can't wait for them to go. There's been a lot of news happening the last couple of weeks because we've had the International Astronaut Congress, we've had new astronauts, and of course we've had a whole bunch of rocket launches. For the last few weeks, we've had a total of 7 Starlink launches. 3 from Slick 40 in the East Coast, 18th of September, 21st September, and 25th of September. And from Vandenberg, we've had on the 19th, 26th, 29th, and 3rd of October. Literally just this morning, looking out of my bedroom window, cursing at the cloud that was in the way. But on the more interesting launches, on 16th of September, we had a Long March 2C with YZ-1S upper stage carrying a Huang Jishu Xi'an, where again, it's a test satellite, secret research, whatever, launching from Jichuan. This is actually, by the way, the first flight of YZ-1S high energy upper stage after its failure in 2024. Speaking of failures, Iran had a launch, a rocket, I believe, called the Zuljana or something like that from Semnam. This was a failure in the second stage. Now, it's probably an orbital rocket launch attempt, maybe a suborbital test of this. It's a all-solid launch vehicle developed by the Revolutionary Guard. They, of course, have been far more successful in the rocket program than the scientists who were using liquid fuel. These guys have, of course, working from a weapons background, and as such, this rocket is a lot closer to an ICBM. Indeed, there's plenty of people calling it an ICBM, including, Iran's own politicians. But generally, whatever, it failed. 22nd of September, SpaceX launched a batch of Starshield NROL 48. That's number 11 in their series of launches for the reconnaissance agency. It looks like there are 8 satellites in 470 kilometer, 70 degree orbits. 24th of September, Geelong 3 launched 12 GSAT for Geely. Again, this is offshore barred the Dongfang Hang Tiangong platform in the Yellow Sea. These satellites launched into sun-synchronous orbit. 24th, we had Falcon 9 launching IMAPS, the Carruthers Geocorona Observatory, or GLIDE, and SWIFO L1. So yeah, if you are a computer nerd, you might be wondering, is IMAP something to do with email in space? No, it's actually part of the Solar Terrestrial Probes program. Basically, it's a heliosphere mapper, right? And it's going to have a bunch of different instruments looking at like energetic particles, plasmas, and other stuff. So all these satellites are going to the L1 point between the Earth and the Sun. So this is not looking at the Sun. This is actually looking out at how the solar wind interacts with the interstellar medium and the heliosphere and everything like that. The Carruthers Geocorona Observatory is, of course, looking at you think the corona, it's actually looking at the Earth's corona, because the solar wind, of course, comes in, interacts with the magnetosphere of the Earth. One of the things they're looking at is hydrogen, which when it gets into the upper atmosphere can escape, it can get ionized and can get kicked out. And this is how the Earth dries out over time. In 1 billion years, the Earth could be a desert world, unfortunately, without giant sandworms. And then SWIFO L1 is the space weather follow-on, Lagrange 1. This is a, 300 and something kilogram satellite that's going to sit between the Earth and the Sun and act as a space weather early warning monitoring satellite. So it'll actually be able to send warnings to Earth. Brace yourselves, there's a solar storm about to hit. Okay, 25th of September, an Atlas V, 551, that's 5 boosters, launched 27 Kuiper satellites from Slick 41. That is the 4th of 9 launches for Kuiper's Constellation. Satellites were put into 630 kilometer, 52 degree orbits. So yeah, Kuiper's actually in slightly higher orbits than Starlink, which means they can see more of the Earth, but then again, they're slightly further away. So, coverage versus bandwidth, right? 26th of September, Long March 4C launched from Jichuan into satellites into 840 kilometer sun synchronous orbit. This is a satellite called Fengyang 3H, and so the Fengyang satellites are weather satellites that are, they're in all sorts of different orbits, but this particular one is going into a sun synchronous orbit, and I believe it's part of a batch which is like 3E, 3F, and 3G. So this is logically replacing 3D, Fengyang 3D. So again, this is a sun synchronous orbit. 27th of September, we had a Long March 6A launching from Taiwan, not Taiwan, carrying 5 Guowang satellites. This is basically Chinese government's equivalent of Starlink with a whole bunch of other features rolled into it. I believe it's the 11th launch of this particular program. They're going to need to get a whole lot more. They're launching a Starlink-sized constellation at 2020 Starlink launch rates. It'll take them a long time. They're going to ramp this up, I'm sure. And 29th of September, Long March 2D launching Xi'an 3001 and 3002. And yeah, Xi'an satellites, we don't know much about them. They're usually experimental satellites. The official word is this is primarily used to test and verify Earth observation technology. But what are they observing? Now, more interestingly, or I guess, okay, if you're the kind of person that's a train spotter, rocket spotter, counting statistics and stuff, it is the 100th launch of the Long March 2D. This is the only the second Chinese launch vehicle to reach the centennial. There were also a couple of suborbital launches worth talking about. September 18th, Blue Origin launched NS-25, and this is carrying a bunch of experiments in the H.G. Wells capsule. So this carried, you know, I don't know, a bunch of experiments all over. They were experiencing zero-G, but then, interestingly, they retired the capsule afterwards, and that's, you know, interesting. So the reason I think why they're retiring this, because it actually has flown fewer times than the other crew capsule. First of all, it's the one that fired off 2 different abort motors. First there was the in-flight abort test, and then later on NS-23, they had an abort motor test, the actual abort motor activation. So it's probably been subject to a fair amount of stress, and it's also an older design, so it's time for them to upgrade and replace it. But the cool thing that they brought on this final flight was a deployable free-flying camera that was ejected from the booster or the capsule at stage separation. And it looks like this thing just spins out of control, but they're using a 360 camera. It's really kind of hypnotic. Now, yeah, you do see that there's this sort of circular elliptical artifact that has a different color transmission from the rest of it. What this is, I believe, is a 360 camera with 2 lenses. The one that is pointing towards the sun, that is getting scattered light from some deposit on the surface of the lens. That's why it looks milky or hazy, and you can see the transition between the two. But if you're very careful, you can pick out all the good frames, all the clean frames, and get a nice view of it. It's very cool. I wish we would do more things like this. 30th of September also saw Rocket Lab launching their HASTE spacecraft launch vehicle, you know, basically an Electron that goes suborbital, in a mission codenamed Justin. It's the 5th launch from Wallops in the HASTE program. It launched pretty much just after sunset, so one would presume that the customer who is interested in this, who is looking at this, is interested in the dark. Perhaps it lets them see some of the interactions between the vehicle and the air at high speed. Okay, so last time we also had the Cygnus spacecraft that had been launched. It was on its way to the International Space Station. It ended up getting delayed a bit. It had some thruster problems. This is not the first time, but it is the first time for this particular variation, since there's a new, slightly bigger, you know, Cygnus. But it has reached the station after some delays, and they're already working with the experiments, one of which I heard about on Twitter this morning. It was TransAstra's capture bag. The idea is that if you want to, say, pick up some space debris or an asteroid or something in space, there's all sorts of debris that could get dislodged if you simply grabbed it, especially like rubble pile asteroids. So they are testing an actuated capture bag, basically a big bag that can open up and then envelop the target. So they had this in the Bishop airlock. They demonstrated they could open it up, enclose it, and then open it. And very, very cool that they've got this. Obviously, they need to scale this thing up a whole lot to make it into a functional thing. Meanwhile, by the way, SpaceX's Dragon spacecraft that's been on the station, that's been performing orbit reboost. There was a second reboost attempt. The first one was successful. The second one was supposed to be like a 20-minute burn, but they shut it down after less than 4 minutes, because it was supposed to swap tanks partway through, and it didn't do that. So they shut it down and you know, figured out what was wrong there. So they did then perform another burn, which was like a 15-minute burn that added 1.62 meters per second to the space station's orbit. So that means that the acceleration of a Dragon with its little Draco thrusters is off the order of about 1 to 2 millimeters per second per second. Another launch which did not happen, by the way, was Nord Space. So Nord Space is a Canadian company. They're building right now a sounding rocket which uses a kerosene liquid oxygen engine. It's the Hadfield engine, incidentally, and named, of course, after Chris Hadfield. Their Tiger rocket is kind of small right now, but they want to scale these things up ultimately. They had a launch countdown and everything, and then they cancelled it. So that launch never happened, but we're looking forward to see it happening. I believe the mission is actually called Getting Screeched In, which is like a reference to a Newfoundland tradition of like welcoming people with like rum, which is that's local rum called Screech. And I think they're also supposed to do things like kiss a cod and sing a song or things like that. Okay, another interest. I'm wondering what the traditions are for introducing new astronauts, because we had a new class of 10 astronauts selected. Yes, this is the first in, I think, 5 years or so, a few years anyway. 10 astronauts, and this is the first class of astronauts in world history, actually, where there's more women than men. So yeah, we had Ben Bailey, who's like a chief warrant officer, U.S. Army. He also went to the Naval Test Pilot School. He flies helicopters. Lauren Edgard's a geologist, and she worked on the Mars rovers and was one of the like advisors, one of the principal investigators for the geology for Artemis 3. Adam Furman, U.S. Air Force test pilot. Cameron Jones, U.S. Air Force F-22 pilot, test pilot. Yuri Kubo, SpaceX engineer. He actually previously worked at Johnson and stuff like that, but he's worked at SpaceX for like 12 years. He's working on avionics for Starshield and things like that. Rebecca Lawler, former US Navy, but she's with NOAA and flies aircraft into hurricanes because she's badass. Anna Menon, you might have heard that name before. Yes, she's a SpaceX engineer. She's also already been to space. On the Polaris Dawn mission, she was the medical officer. And so this now closes a circle. We've had Axiom Space take former astronauts, right, like Peggy Whitson, and make them into commercial astronauts. Now we've had a commercial astronaut transition into NASA astronaut role. So she'll obviously have all the cheat codes for the Dragon spacecraft. And she also has her husband there, by the way, who got selected during the previous program, astronaut selection. Imelda Muller, she's a US Navy submariner, did medical support at the NASA's Neutral Buoyancy Lab, but right now she's doing a residency, or was doing, as an anesthesiologist. Yes, hard word to say, harder word to spell, let me tell you. Yeah, that tweet took a long to type in. Erin Overcash, degrees in aerospace engineering, bioastronautics, F-18 Hornet, Super Hornet pilot, also rugby player, awesome. And Catherine Spies, Marine Corps attack helicopter pilot, experimental test pilot, and director of engineering at test pilot at Gulfstream. But of course, you know, with the changes in the US space program and the space station perhaps winding down and commercial stations coming online, the current plans look like there will be a lot fewer flight opportunities for NASA astronauts. They may not be spending 6 months in space anymore, judging by the current, the newly re-envisaged plans by Sean Duffy and bros. Anyway, we also had some discussion. There was a press conference about Artemis 2, which could happen now as early as February of 2026. So yeah, we've confirmed that they're going to do the lunar flyby, first human flight around the moon since Apollo. So that's brought it actually forward from the earlier dates, which were potentially in April. So yeah, it looks like they're moving forwards in that. That's getting very exciting. Meanwhile, Lockheed Martin have started exploring other launch options for the Orion capsule after saying, maybe just if SLS hypothetically dies, Orion, maybe it could fly on something else. And it's a bit fatter than Starliner or the Dragon. It would fit nicely on top of ULA's Vulcan or Blue Origin's New Glenn, although New Glenn might need to work a bit on its lift capability. Speaking of New Glenn, We're getting ready for end of October. We're very likely going to see the second flight of New Glenn carrying the Escapade missions to Mars. The spacecraft have been moved to Florida. They are getting integrated right now. Once again, Blue Origin are going to be attempting to recover the booster, sorry. And as such, the booster is named Never Tell Me the Odds. Right, that's a terrible Han Solo impersonation. Yes, the odds of successfully navigating an asteroid belt are approximately 3,720 to 1. Thankfully, there are not a lot of asteroid belts in low Earth orbit. I think the problems, the distant odds are going to come from the technical challenges of having a booster descend through the atmosphere and land, of course, on the barge, on Jacqueline. I look forward to them succeeding in this, but moreover, I am looking forward to seeing Escapade finally fly off to Mars. They're going to have to do a sort of circuitous route, which I believe will involve coming out and then having a Earth gravity assist later next year. Sierra Space, on the other hand. Now, Sierra's Dreamliner, we have been waiting for this. This was, of course, named as the third cargo option for the International Space Station. It was a space plane that would dock and it would provide beautiful low G loading, return and pinpoint landing at runways, which would enable rapid offloading of cargo. Unfortunately, it seems that NASA is sort of somewhat losing faith, and the first flight of Dream Chaser has now been downgraded from docking with the ISS to being a free flyer. They will obviously be running a number of experiments in the spacecraft and in its module, and they'll be returning. But hey, a lot of people are actually building free flyers these days. It is unfortunate that it has taken this long. But yeah, you know, the Dream Chaser's design has roots back in like NASA's HL-20 lifting body, which goes back into the 1990s. And I believe that itself was also inspired by older research by like NASA, Soviet Union, and everything else. So yeah, Dream Chaser, if you remember, originally was pitched to be part of the Commercial Crew Program. Yeah, that's how long that it's been taking. Okay. And now moving over to the other big test launch vehicle, of course, Starship, super heavy. We now know that Flight 11 is going to be on the 13th. SpaceX have put up a web page with a whole bunch of new information about a previous flight, about expectations for this flight. Again, we are going suborbital. We're not going for, or they're not going for a recovery. That will be, you know, launch 13 at the earliest. That will be when we have V3 everything. But yeah, looks like October 13th is a good date. I unfortunately have stuff around that time that I need to be in the West Coast, so I'm probably not going to be able to get there, especially if it's delayed. Firefly, they were testing their booster for Flight 7, and on September 29th, it exploded during a test. There was a whole bunch of fire, bit of a conflagration which grew and then followed by the entire booster letting go and giant explosion. So yeah, they were supposed to, of course, have new like heat shielding on the booster itself. I'm not sure how that interacted with it or if it was an unrelated problem that caused this, but now they were trying to recover from the failure of Flight 6. Now they've had Flight 7 booster fail before it even got there. Flight 8 booster is no doubt trying to get ready to make sure it can really represent Firefly. Now, the big news, of course, on the political side is that the government shutdown has shut down NASA, although there's a few parts of NASA that are continuing to operate. For example, I believe that the Artemis people are somehow getting exempted from this. They're finding money to keep the SLS funded because, you know, that's what politicians do. But yeah, there's, you know, your standard partisan politics with one side wanting this and one side saying, no, you can't have that. The budget has not been passed, so bunches of the US government are shut down, essentially. That's how it works. The president isn't supposed to directly control the budget. Net effect is that the US government is largely shut down. And that does mean that I'm going to miss the Blue Angels at Fleet Week next week, which is really unfortunate. We're going to have a whole bunch of other flight teams showing off. We're going to have the Patriot. We're going to have the Shooting Star dude. We're going to have the Canadian Snowbirds. being probably the biggest act on display, showing off their awesome aircraft and, functioning government, right? But yeah, this all happened, incidentally, at the same time as the International Astronautical Congress, where a lot of the space agencies are all together in Sydney talking about their big plans and interacting. And of course, Sean Duffy's there talking up NASA about how awesome it is at exactly the same time as most of NASA isn't supposed to be doing anything. I mean, yes, it is rather unfortunate, but NASA is still the biggest game in town down in in this. Now, that being said, like with changes to strategies, NASA appropriations, mission plans, like Europe is now looking at the missions that were planned to be with NASA and may not be with NASA. Things like their Mars rover or Mars sample return. Some of those European governments have made some big announcements this week. For example, Germany has announced that they're investing 35 billion euros, that's about $41 billion, into defense and space technology. So this is in part like wanting to, expand their aerospace capabilities, but also it's sort of indirectly a response to Russia sort of trying to build up and try to push into Eastern Europe. We've had some other stuff going on, like European Space Agency has signed a deal with Avio to create a reusable upper stage demonstrator for the Vega rocket, which is funny because the Vega is completely not reusable. It's all solid rockets. It's pretty reliable. It's been relatively solid solid rocket booster. Now they're going to build a reusable upper stage, which is okay, interesting, and it looks like a mini Starship. It actually looks like comically misproportioned, but there's good engineering reasons for this. That upper stage is a solid rocket motor. It's very dense in terms of its propellant. This upper stage, if it's using methane, is going to be a whole lot bigger, but it does look funny. It has these really teeny tiny flaps on the front. Maxar, they announced like they're renaming themselves. That's a typical thing you do at these big events. Maxar is now going to be like Vantor and Lanteris. I've no idea what that means. Synspective, purchasing a bunch of flights on Electron, right? So these are the kind of things that have been going on at the IAC. And perhaps the best news that came out for me in the last couple of weeks has been that NASA has officially revived the Viper mission. Yes, Viper, that was the one that was supposed to fly as part of the CLIPS program, and then the cost of the CLIPS lander pushed the rover's budget over its limit, leading to them have to basically shut down the project. Now they're bringing it back, saying, well, that's silly to build a rover and not send it to the moon. Now Blue Origin is going to be sending this Viper rover to the moon sometime down the line. The rover's ready. I don't know when Blue Origin will be. Finally, last Thursday, we had quite an impressive Starlink re-entry over California that had all my neighbors talking. I actually put together a video explaining the differences between space debris re-entries and meteorite re-entries. You should watch it, but yeah, it's always fascinating to see a space event on these like next door mailing lists. So yes, keep your eyes to the sky. I'm Scott Manley. Fly safe.